Hey, what's up, folks? Welcome back to On Texas Football, and welcome back to another edition of Sunday School. I'm lifetime Longhorn Rod Babers, and want to say thank you, first of all, to our sponsor, Vaughn Lane. We'll give you a message from our friends over at Vaughn Lane coming up a little bit later on in the show, but vaughnlane.com. We appreciate all their support here of On Texas Football. All right, today we're looking at sacks. All right, it's what we're looking at. We're going to look at sacks. We'll look at who got the sacks for Texas, how they got those sacks, when they got those sacks, where they occurred, and why, based on the research that I actually, found and the research that I've been doing the last couple of days about this topic, why I think Texas should do this more to create more sacks. All right. So basically, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a coach just about havoc and about creating pressure. And he said, yeah, man, honestly, there are very few human beings out there that can just line up from down to down and whip their opponent on every down. It's rare. He said, usually you need a schematic advantage. He's talking about from the defensive side of things. He said, so if you want to create havoc, if you want to force negative plays, you need to give them a schematic amplifier, a schematic advantage, a little cheat code. And there's a few of these, right? You can run twists and stunts. They call them games up front. We're twists and stunts with the defensive line and try to confuse and discombobulate blocking schemes and protection schemes. You can just blitz, just straight up just send more guys and they have to block. Right. And if you send those guys, sometimes combining those concepts, blitz with a twist and a stunt, you confuse blocking schemes and you can confuse blocking schemes and outnumber them at the point of attack. That's another way. Simulated pressures, right? Smells like a blitz, looks like a blitz, tastes like a blitz, feels like a blitz, walks like a blitz, and talks like a blitz, but it ain't a blitz. A blitz is officially when you send at least five guys, right? Five or more guys. That's a blitz. Simulated pressure is when it feels like a blitz, but it's actually you only sending four guys, right? But you want to make it kind of look like a blitz from a certain standpoint, and so you can also kind of confuse the blocking schemes. That's another way to do it. There's also delayed blitzers, delayed rushers, delayed pass rushers. You do that because you want the protection to essentially determine itself. Right. Once the protection is determined, once they decide, oh, these are the guys that we're blocking, and we're blocking it this way, we're sliding protection this way or that way, and then everybody knows who their guy is, then you add a rusher late, a delayed blitzer, delayed rusher. Sometimes it's not even a blitzer, it's a delayed rusher. And then you could also end up confusing the blocking scheme or cheating the blocking scheme, if you will. So there are a lot of different ways you can do it. Those are kind of some of the main ways with the front that you can try to force havoc plays or force negative plays on the offense. So I wanted to look at just sacks, right? Just looked at sacks. You probably can do this with pressures. It'd be more exhaustive and more extensive and more expansive. Probably can do it with, maybe tackles for loss, just looking at different fronts. I wanted to look at sacks. That's the big splash play that everybody pays attention to last year. By the way, for Texas, there is a discrepancy with the sacks. Just throwing it out there. I ain't trying to call anybody out. But if you look at Texas website, they got Texas with 48 sacks last year, which I believe would be the record. The record is 47 by 2008 Texas, if I'm not mistaken. Texas got them with 48. If you look at the Texas stats and the Texas cumulative stats for the 2024 season. But if you look at College Football Reference, which is a really good website for gathering stats for teams, and if you look at ESPN, Texas has 46 stats. 46 sacks. If you look at ESPN, if you look at College Football Reference, I believe another one is CFB Stats. They got 46 sacks. So, hey, whatever it is, all right? But it is important because 48 would give you the record. 46 is one shy of the record. I was under the impression they had tied the record. But like I said, maybe I'm off. Seems like everybody's off when it comes to sacks for Texas. But anyway, I digress. That's not the point here. I want to look at where the sacks came from. So I looked at these different categories: blitzes, simulated pressures. I looked at delayed blitzes, delayed rushers. I looked at twists and stunts, games being played up front. and almost separated these things into different categories, different buckets, and see if on a given play where Texas got a sack, how many of these concepts, these strategies were being utilized, and how many of their sacks came when no cheat code or none of those previously mentioned amplifiers are being used. What I call kind of just a straight up win. When there is no twist and stump, there is no blitz, there is no simulated pressure, there is no schematic amplifier or schematic cheat code. It's just you lining up, open up a can of whoop on your opponent, right? And just beating them one on one. So I actually created a category just for that when there were. Now, it wasn't necessarily that the player who got the sack was the player who either blitzed or the player who was involved with the twist and the stunt or the player who was the focal point of the simulated pressure. It was just more that concept occurred on that play, right? Because it's just not, if you get a sack, and they are running, let's say, a blitz, you can get the sack, but not necessarily be the blitzer, not necessarily be the player that added the fifth or the sixth or even the seventh man to the pass rush. But you can benefit from it. And the whole point is that the coach I was talking to, he said, you have to utilize those types of cheat codes to force negative plays. Because even if you bring, let's say you overload one side, then bring a blitz to that side, the side with the one-on-one with the isolated matchup may end up winning and may end up getting the sack, but not necessarily. That wasn't the scheme, right? That wasn't the schematic advantage. That was the scheme giving you a one-on-one isolation on the other side. You get my point? So the whole point of this is I create those categories, and the player who got the sack on that play wasn't necessarily the player that created the schematic advantage or amplification. It was just that it occurred on that play. But that still is a coach, in my opinion, forcing a negative play, right? It's forcing the havoc play by giving his players a little bit of a cheat code. So that's basically what we did here, right? In a nutshell. All right. So when I looked at it, straight up wins when you didn't have any of those previous concepts I mentioned to help break down pass protection. Texas basically 32%. I'm rounding up here. 32% of your sacks came on just straight up wins. So basically close to a third of your sacks came on straight up wins, grown man reps, where you just your guy beat a guy straight up. And you did not necessarily have an amplifier utilized on that play. The next, and that was the most successful, by the way, the most successful of your, if you look at concepts that led to sacks or created sacks, it was just straight up wins, which that does track with PK, right? PK doesn't like a lot of exotic looks, a lot of exotic fronts. He is pretty, I'm going to call it plain Jane. But PK likes, his, he likes his trademarks, and they are not very elaborate or exotic, right? Johnny Nansen came in last season, and Texas got a lot more exotic and got a lot more elaborate with personnel groupings and stuff like that. A lot more specific and matchup based defense. That's not really what PK, at least from my time studying PK, that's not what you get over the majority of his time as a defensive play caller and coordinator. But I think he's getting more of that, right? So blitzing, right? Texas last year, 118th in blitz rate. They blitzed, among the fewest times of any team in college football. Very, very low blitz rate. But they actually had a really, if you look at it, I think they had a really high success rate when blitzing. Almost 24% of their sacks came on blitzes. And like I said, Texas didn't blitz a lot. That's not something that PK wanted to do a lot of. I would predict, kind of based on my research, Texas is going to blitz more. Or at least they should blitz more. As I said, you're 118th in the country in blitz rate last season, and yet 11 of your sacks came on blitzes. Now, here's where it gets a little bit more complicated. I looked at also there. I looked at delayed blitz. I talk about that delayed rushers. Now there are three different ways to look at this. You could scheme up a delayed rusher to add a defender late to the pass rush to outnumber, the pass protection or to confuse the pass protection once it's already determined. That is something that defenses do. Defenses also allow linebackers who are spies to have certain keys. Like if you're spying a quarterback and the quarterback is contained in the pocket, and at times I would say there's freedom, flexibility within the defense that allows that spy to add himself to the pass rush. And that happened a lot with Texas. It just kind of looking at the film. And there's another situation where you are a spy or a hole player, or you are, let's say you are maybe even responsible for a tight end or a running back in the backfield. That running back or tight end adds themselves to the pass protection. Well, then now you can add yourself to the pass rush. If the player that you were defending ends up adding himself to the pass protection, that is also sometimes a added, or at least an adjustment for defenses. It's hard to tell which is which when you're just watching the film and you don't have the knowledge of what the actual defensive call is. So I kind of created a separate bucket for that too. The delayed pressures, but I had subcategories of spy, just a blitz, a player who's just adding himself as a blitzer, or a player who was initially a spy and then adds himself to the pass rush. That'll be important. I'll tell you why. Because sometimes that added defender to the pass rush, sometimes that player is a fifth player, right? A fifth, which makes it a blitz. Technically, it's a 5-man pressure. Technically, by definition, at least five defenders, that would equal a blitz. So there are times where it ended up being a 5-man pressure because an Anthony Hill or a Lianga Lafau or a David Benda added themselves to the pressure, and as a spy ended up getting a sack because they tackled him behind the line of scrimmage. So in that case, if you add that to it and added just 5-man pressures, period, looking at that also as a subcategory, 30% of your sacks came off 5-man pressures, which tells me you should blitz more. Now, it's important that you also have really, really good spies, because you're going to play a lot of dual threat quarterbacks as I come in. You'll play Diego Pavia, you'll play Taylor Green, John Mateer, Marcel Reed, Gunnar Stockton, DJ Lagway. You're going to play a lot. Half your schedule is going to be dual threat quarterbacks. So the ability to spy with different defenders, really, really important. And Texas did that a lot last season and did it successfully to the point where they would end up forcing negative plays with the actual spy, the defender that was the spy. I looked at simulated pressures, looked like a blitz, smells like a blitz, not a blitz. 15% of your sacks came on simulated pressures. If I looked at just delayed pressure period, I talked about that, a little subcategory, but that was about 16% was a delayed pressure that came late, either a spy or a whole player adding themselves to the pass rush, or a player who had, coverage responsibilities adding themselves to the pass rush late. Or like I said, it could have been predetermined that he was going to be added late to the rush, whatever the reason was. That was 16% of your sacks last season. And so, and now look at twists and stunts. Also, about 13% of your sacks came on twists and stunts. These are when you want to loop players on the defensive line and try to exchange. It's gap exchange, essentially. Gap responsibility. You're exchanging gap responsibilities on the defensive line and hoping to confuse protections and confuse blocking schemes that way. So based on my research, I'm going to say Texas should definitely blitz more. Last year, 118th in blitz rate. I think your box, if you look at Texas box blitz rate last season, that's basically the linebackers blitzing. You were at 19%. I think you should be close to 30%. Because Anthony Hill's just that good blitzing from the next level. So this is what the research told me about individual players. If you look at straight up wins, remember these are grown man reps, straight up wins. Trey Moore is your best. He, at least based on the stats, he's the guy that wins the most in straight up situations. Sounds crazy, but he is. He had 5.5 sacks. If you look at ESPN or College Football Reference, he had 6.5 sacks according to Texas. That's one of the discrepancies. 5 of his 5.5 sacks, or 5 of his 6.5 sacks. 5.5 of his 6.5 sacks, or 4.5 of his 5.5 sacks, all came from straight up wins. Just grown men reps. He had one sack also when he was essentially a spy that ended up adding himself to the pass rush later. But Trey Moore is extremely productive in situations where, you know, he knows that, hey, I got a one-on-one here, I can go in, and he's actually won against a couple of double teams too, to make some of those plays. If you also look at straight up wins, and that's what it tells about Trey Moore. Trey Moore can go win one-on-ones because he's an elite, he's a natural pass rusher. Like, he's just a natural pass rusher. So if he gets a one-on-one, he's probably gonna win it. So that's an added value for Trey Moore. I know he's getting some linebacker reps now and on the edge, but that's what you love about Trey Moore's game, is that if you can design a one-on-one, Trey Moore can go win. And if you look at Colin Simmons, I'll get to Anthony Hill in a second, but Colin Simmons, he had 9 sacks last year. 2 came from straight up wins. 2 came on plays where there were blitzes. 2 of them came on plays where there were simulated pressures. And 3 of them came on plays where they ran twists and stunts in games up front. What does that tell you? He's your best all-around, most versatile pass rusher, period, which we already know. But he can rush the pass from any situation. Second level, he can run, whether it be with twists and stunts. Like, he can win no matter what you're doing on defense. He can still go win, as long as it's creating a favorable matchup for him, which honestly is against 95% of college O linemen. That's going to be a matchup advantage for him. Anthony Hill, he got, out of his 8 sacks, 4 came as a spy. 3 came on plays where there was a blitz. And 1 of them came on a play where there was a simulated pressure. So what does it tell me? He's easily your best spy. And that's going to be important when you play all these dual threat quarterbacks we talked about. And he's your best blitzer, like just straight up blitzer in the front 7, especially from the second level. He's amazing. Got 30% pressure rate last season. Guy's never had over 100 pass rush snaps in a season. And he's already got, 13 sacks in 2 years. He's a dude. And one thing I also found out, man, you're going to miss Barron Terrell, because Barron Terrell was also one of those guys. He won no matter what the situation. He's got, if you go look at 2 of his, he had 3 sacks with straight up wins. Then he ended up with 6 sacks, 3 with straight up wins. 2 of them came on plays where Texas was blitzing. 1 of them came on a play where Texas had a simulated pressure. There's just all these different types of situations where Barron Terrell could win. And I even saw this stat, actually, and it makes sense about Barron Terrell, that he had, when he was rushing from the 3, the 4-eye or the 5 technique, he had a 19.4% pressure rate. Usually his pressure rate was around 14%. It was at 19 down to 20% when he was lined up in those gaps. They moved him around a lot, and it was really advantageous for him because he ended up making a lot of plays with those matchup advantages. Okay, so when did the sacks take place? Over 50%, 52% of your sacks came on first down. Yeah. Now 9 of those were, I think, 2-minute drill situations, but that still leaves a lot of your sacks on first down. 45% of your sacks came on 3rd and 4th and long, or 2-minute drill situations where they abandon the run, they abandon all run concepts like play action, pass, and RPO, and everybody knows it is butt naked, straight drop back passing, right? Everybody knows what you're doing when it's 2-minute drill, or it's 3rd and long, or 4th and long. And in those situations, that was 45% of the sacks Texas got. So what it tells you on first down, I think in those first situations, you want to be up in games. Texas was up in games, right? They were up big in some games like UTSA. They got 4 sacks in that game. Up big against Mississippi State, got 6 sacks. Up big against Oklahoma, got 6 sacks. Up big against Kentucky, got 6 sacks. When you get up in these games, teams, they abandon the run and they get desperate. They want to throw it, and they throw it on early downs. That's when you get easy sacks. If Texas is going to get up and big in games this season, they'll be able to get a lot of big sacks out of that. So over 50% of your sacks came on first down. Only 15% of your sacks came on second down. Basically, over 80% of all your sacks on first and third down. Right? You want to be up big in games, and you want to be able to win on early downs so you can force third and long, second and long. Then your sack numbers will definitely go up. Something else to keep in mind here, because I know we're getting close to the end of it. Just looking at it, I think for Texas, just looking at the information here and all the raw data, I believe Texas should increase their blitz rate, just not a ton, but just a little bit. Increase their blitz rate. You could increase the simulated pressures, but I think increasing the twists and stunts on a defensive line are probably more important, because that'll help isolate the edges for guys like Anthony Hill if he's on the edge, or Colin Simmons if he's on the edge, or Trey Moore if he ends up on the edge. So you should blitz more, take advantage of Brad Spence, who's a really good pass rushing linebacker. So is Anthony Hill. Now Trey Moore is double dipping, cross training at both linebacker and edge. So you should blitz more from the second level, take advantage of those guys. And I think you should run more twists and stunts to isolate your edges who are really good. Real quick nugget about the edges. Colton Vasek. We just need Colton Vasek to stay healthy. I don't even know if he needs to get better. He had 2 sacks last season. All of them came in straight win situations. He was just mano a mano. Grown man against grown man, and I'm going to whip you. Open up a can of whoop on you. Remember I said when I looked at havoc rate, you know who had the highest havoc rate last season when you looked at it and broke it down? Or at least among the players that are returning. Actually, among all the players, period. Now, the sample size was small, but it was Colton Vasek. 4.6% havoc rate. Dude is a beast and can win straight-up situations. Just need him to stay healthy for an extended period of time. I think you'll get I think you'll get a really impressive product as a result. So that's something to keep in mind too. But just looking at it, those sacks, and like I said, you can look at pressures and it'll give you a little bit more specificity about, extrapolating the roles of these players and how Texas is trying to apply pressure. But there's no doubt Texas should blitz more. And Texas is one of those teams that they don't need a lot of exotic, elaborate amplifiers to help them win on defense. They just simply have the best pass rush in the country, potentially. Remember, I gave you this stat. Among the returning defenders in college football this season who have had at least 8 sacks in a season and a pressure rate of at least 15% in the last 3 years. That's since 2022, 23, 24. Last 3 years, Texas is the only program to have 3 such defenders. That's Trey Moore, Anthony Hill, and Colin Simmons. The more any way you look at it, the pass rush just looks more impressive. All right, let's thank our friends over at Vaughn Lane before we end today's program. Thank you very much to Vaughn Lane. We appreciate them and their ongoing support of On Texas football. Listen, folks, you got to get to the major cities here in the state of Texas, whether you're trying to get to Austin, DFW, Houston, or trying to get to San Antonio. And it's a toss-up, right? Do you deal with the airport chaos? I hope your flight isn't delayed. Or do you brace yourself for hours behind the wheel, battling traffic and road rage and burning a day of productivity? Now there's a third option, and it's better in every way. It's Vaughn Lane, folks. You arrive at a luxury hotel terminal. No TSA lines, no long-term parking lots. It's just a seamless boarding experience that takes minutes, not hours. You settle into a plush leather seat, a hot towel, pillow, and blanket are at arm's reach. Your attendant offers complimentary snacks, beverages, and on select trips, a full meal. And if you need to relax, you can lean back and enjoy the ride. If you want to stay productive, there's high-speed Wi-Fi and power at every seat. And while you're unplugging or powering through, the Vaughn Lane team is monitoring traffic in real time, using smarter routes and efficient detours to keep your trip smooth and on schedule. And now is the perfect time to plan your fall travel. Booking is open through September, so whether you're headed to a college football game, a weekend getaway, or a business trip that needs to be done right, Vaughn Lane makes the journey part of the reward. Vaughn Lane serves Austin, Dallas, Houston, Fort Worth, San Antonio, and in the Southeast, Atlanta, Nashville, and Memphis. Visit VaughnLane.com and use the code OTF25 for $20 off your first ride with Vaughn Lane. That's Vaughn Lane, Elevated Regional Bus Transportation. Thank you very much to Vaughn Lane, first and foremost. And thank you very much to Matthew behind the scenes, doing a great job as always. And thank you to all of you guys out there for watching and for listening to another edition of Sunday School. And for Matthew and for Vaughn Lane, I'm Lifetime Longhorn Rod Babers. Until next time, hook 'em horns.